It's 2022 and my arcade has gotten an upgrade. It's been about 18 months since I took a look at the Arcade Guy's Retro Plus arcade cabinet, and they reached out saying they were going to send over an updated Raspberry Pi model as well as an updated SD card running their latest build. Are current owners missing out from this latest update? The biggest hardware change comes from the Raspberry Pi 400, which is pretty much a desktop computer version of the Raspberry Pi. It's slightly faster than a normal Raspberry Pi, but if, like me, you had already replaced the case on my existing Raspberry Pi, you could have overclocked it to be the same or even faster, so it's not necessarily that much better than the original. So if you were expecting faster hardware, I would wait for the Raspberry Pi 5 whenever that comes out. Luckily though, since everything is using USB, it's pretty easy to make the swap over to a new hardware, though it can look more daunting than it is because of all the extra wires. In short, it involves unplugging the USB from the old Raspberry Pi and taking that out, plugging in the USB hub into the new Raspberry Pi because the 400 does not have as many USB ports, plugging the individual controllers in, and yes, the order does matter, and then putting the Raspberry Pi inside of the arcade cabinet. In the kit they sent me included a new power supply, which, looking at the two, the only difference is 0.1 volts, so they probably actually are interchangeable. Though just to be safe, I did swap out the whole power supply, which does involve removing some double-sided tape, so you'll probably want some more in order to keep the switch up at the front. But other than that, it's the same as any other USB charger. Now that all that's done, what does this actually do? The main difference is moving from RetroPie to Recalbox, which on the surface may not seem like a big issue since both of them are relying on external emulators to achieve the same kind of goal. But Recalbox does work a bit better on an arcade cabinet as opposed to RetroPie, since it does allow most user settings to be edited from their UI as opposed to a MS-DOS style interface. Though if you are a power user, you may miss some of the features from RetroPie like overclocking that are not in Recalbox, at least in this iteration. But for the average user, Recalbox is an overall better option. This new update is still based on around a 128GB SD card, so the number of total games still hovers around that 17,000 mark without much of a change. Though it's 2022, so I would really like Arcade Guys to offer a 256GB version instead. If you are looking for just retro arcade games, then that extra space probably is not really needed. Though in this new build of Recalbox, it does have a lot of 3D games that were not available when I did this video back in 2020. And 3D games take up a lot more space since a lot of them came on disc, so it would be nice to have an extra option for a bigger card. This new disc image does include a lot more emulators than the 2020 version did, including many 3D arcades, which I mentioned in my previous video as being left out. But it also includes a number of early computer emulators, which is not necessarily what I would use my arcade for, and some of these only include 1, 2, 3 games. So it's on there for name only for the most part, and if you are one of the people who are looking to play those vintage computer games, it's great, but for probably the majority of people, the biggest new addition is going to be for 3D arcade games. Though games that run on System 22, such as Time Crisis, are still missing, which is a big bummer for people who are looking to use the light guns. Console games like the N64, PlayStation, and Dreamcast are present, and unlike before, this new image actually includes controller mapping for these games, so you can play them on the 6 buttons that are available. But if you are going to be looking to do this more exclusively, I would recommend getting like a gamepad or something, since 6 buttons is not really enough to play some of these games. The way some of these games are configured is also different in this image. Just like before, there will be a border around the game window in order to fill up that empty space, but unlike before, it doesn't seem to be game specific anymore, as well as in some cases it's turned on where it used to be turned off, and it can end up cutting off some of the gameplay field. Another thing that's enabled is screen filtering, which in some cases does make the game appear a little more authentic to what it would have looked like on a portable screen or anything like that. But it's also turned on for other systems that wouldn't normally have that effect. But luckily you can change this even on a per game basis if you wanted to, so that might be something you need to go in and turn off with this version. With the addition of these 3D arcade games, one thing that I do wish they did was offer a single view for all arcade games, since some arcade games are going to be in the FBA section, some are going to be in the Naomi section, some will be in Neo-Geo, though many Neo-Geo games are listed in FBA and Neo-Geo. So yeah, I wish there was one central place to see all the arcade games, though if you do have one game in mind, you can use the search function to find it. In terms of overall emulation quality, everything seems to be roughly where it was in RetroPie, if not maybe slightly better. The one exception being the audio in some Sega Genesis games being a little bit distorted, though that was the only example that I found. You should be able to get updated emulators with a new version of Recalbox, though it's worth noting that the arcade guys don't recommend updating anything since that can introduce new issues. Overall, I think that this is a great update for this arcade. The move to Recalbox makes it a little bit more of a user-friendly experience, and the additional games in system supported makes it a little bit more of what I was looking for originally, having many more games that people would recognize. If you already have your RetroPie set up the way you want to, or if you've already moved on to your own custom image, then this is probably not an upgrade for you. But for people looking to buy this arcade new, or for people who are not really wanting to dig into the systems in order to get some of these other games working, this update does bring home a much more arcade experience.